his name, but they actually play Han, Handman. He said, throw that punch at me now. Jim, watch how I throw my head. I can do stunts too. Watch me. So Han was supposed to throw like a right cross. Boom. And Bruce said, okay, throw it now. So Han went, bam, threw the right cross, man, and caught Bruce right on the chin, right here, on the lip. Split his lip, blood went flying. By accident. You know, it was an accident. Accidents happen.
As his fame grew, so did the pressures of stardom. Lee was a recreational cannabis user since his days in Hollywood. But as stress grew, so did his use of marijuana and hashish.
I just know that Bruce, also outside of the film business, he was under incredible pressure. He was constantly, not constantly, but he told me people wanted to challenge him in the streets, and he was always watching his back. And I think at one point, it came to the point where Bruce was carrying a gun.
On May the 10th, 1973, Lee suffered a major setback.
We were helping Bruce Lee duck Enter the Dragon. We had just broken for lunch when we heard someone shouting from the upstairs toilet. We then ran up to see what was wrong. We saw a body lying outside the toilet door, and it was Bruce Lee. We tried to bring him around and carry him into the dubbing room and place him on the sofa. I remember his mouth was juddering up and down, as though he was experiencing an epileptic fit. So the sound mixer placed a metal spoon in his mouth. And then the producer came and took him to hospital.
On the evening of May 10th, somewhere after 5 o'clock, after I'd finished my afternoon clinic, I received a call that someone was being brought in from Golden Harvest and that it had something to do with Bruce Lee. On arrival, in fact, it was Bruce himself. He was brought in by several men who were carrying him without a stretcher. He was deposited on the examination table in the emergency room, and they quickly made an exit. We had one nurse who was assigned to the emergency room, and she was to call other help as needed. It became obvious right away that because Bruce was so ill that my help was quite frightened, and they absented themselves as quickly as they could. Bruce's situation was one that appeared to be quite serious. He had very irregular respiration. He was perspiring profusely. His color was not good. He was alternatingly flaccidly unresponsive, and then some rigidity. There was occasionally some stiffness of his neck. His pupils did not react as they should, and he literally looked like a dead person. Because I saw that I was going to have difficulty getting sufficient assistance, I had the hospital switchboard call for some of the people who helped me with anesthesia. Dr. Cecilia Wong, a very well-trained anesthesiologist, responded, came in. We moved an anesthesia machine from the surgery suite on the floor above. In the meantime, I'd been using an ambu bag and an emergency device to assist with respiration. We actually placed a tube in Bruce's windpipe or trachea to assist with the respiration better and to prevent him vomiting into his windpipe. We got an IV going, put a stomach tube down to evacuate stomach contents, and in the meantime assessed him as having something going on inside his head. Because southern-born Chinese, and particularly Hong Kong Chinese, have a reported high incidence of abnormalities of the blood vessels in the brain, and because of what we knew of the history of his collapse, we thought that was what was happening. A decision was made to give mannitol, a drug which shrinks the brain but causes tremendous urine output. A catheter was placed in the bladder to take care of that, and as the mannitol was given, Bruce began to improve a great deal. A contact had been made with Dr. Peter Wu, a neurosurgeon with whom Dr. Wong worked frequently, and a man to whom I referred patients and who had cared for me as a patient previously. And Dr. Wu concurred in that decision and eventually received Bruce when we moved him from Baptist to St. Teresa's. Baptist Hospital had no available beds, and we felt that Bruce needed to be in a place where he could get intensive nursing care. And I went with him in the ambulance, still resuscitating him with the anesthesia machine as we moved into St. Teresa's. By this time, he was very much improved after he had struggled and resisted us in a discoordinated way as we were working on him. And he was received in the emergency facilities at St. Teresa's, and then from that point, Dr. Weiu took over his care.
He was brought in unconscious. He was in coma, and he was having a fit. And we brought into the hospital in really quite a serious situation. From what we gather is caused by cerebral edema, the swelling of the brain. So we were assembled there, and we did some resuscitation for him. And he was very lucky. The next day, he regained his consciousness completely, and he was able to relate to us what happened that day. So as a matter of fact, what he told me was that while he was taping for the film, he chewed a couple of leaves which he had been given by somebody else, and this was hashish leaf, and so he had a severe nausea and vomiting, and then he lapsed into coma while he was vomiting. And we did obtain a specimen from his vomitus, and which discovered a quantity of hashish. So our diagnosis was that he had probably an overdose of this stuff, or he may be unusually sensitive to this stuff, and that was the cause of his trouble. So we had given him a warning before he was discharged from the hospital, saying that he was very lucky. It happened that we were there at the time when he was in critical conditions. We were there to be able to do something about it. And had he not, no medical attention had been available, he would have been dead.
Bruce left Hong Kong soon thereafter, and as I understand it, went to the West Coast to seek further medical opinion, and I did not see him related to that illness thereafter.
Bruce had a thorough physical checkup in the States, and the doctor responsible for his checkup told him that he was a man in the 20s. His physical fitness was such that he was still a man in his 20s. So I think Bruce must be fully convinced by then that he was invincible. You know, he was really in his perpetual youth. That was probably what brought him down, I think.
Enter the Dragon now completed, Lee returned to work on Game of Death.
There's a movie he did with a basketball player, Game of Death, and he was going to finish it with me. And he wasn't going to kill me off. It was about different levels, and we're talking about spirituality and different levels of awareness as you get to higher levels in this temple that he had built. And I think he'd done the first 2 levels or something at the time. We were going higher.
Taiwanese sex symbol Betty Ting Pei was to play opposite Lee.
I ran into Bruce, his wife and Raymond Chow, in front of the hotel. Introductions were given by Raymond, and this was the very first time we met.
He was telling me at the time, which I got to admit I didn't take much notice of, he was getting headaches. And I was thinking, God, you look healthy. I mean, I've never seen anybody look healthier than you. And I just dismissed it. And then the second time he told me was in a restaurant, Japanese restaurant, the night before I was leaving. So I'll have dinner with you tomorrow night. I said, look, if you're not feeling well, don't worry about it, and I'll see you when I get back from London. I was going to London, my wife was going to have a baby, and I was going to come back and do the movie. He said, no, I said I'll have dinner with you, so I'll be there.
He visited my home to discuss the screenplay for Game of Death, which was to star us both.
But that evening, I was with Raymond Chow, who was the head of Gawa, the Golden Harvest, with Bruce. And Bruce was the main partner, and Raymond was like 50-50 almost. And Raymond and I were sitting there staring at each other with not much to say. And I said, where's Bruce? He said, I should be here. I said, well, call him. Let's see what's happened to him. And so he said, I know where he is. He's not at home. He's with this other woman.
Bruce said he was experiencing